Dear colleagues, we'll start. We hope Professor Ewa Thompson will connect with us in process. But today is quite a unique opportunity to speak about the post-colonial issues and about the perspectives, perhaps, yes, of the development of post-colonial studies or post-colonial critique in connection with our situation, connection with the Ukrainian situation, but also more generally. So the topic of our discussion, past in the present, the legacy of colonialism in words and worlds. And we were to have two very important speakers, and one of them is with us, Professor Gayatri Chakravorty Spivak from Columbia University. And also we hope that Ewa Thompson from Rice University will also connect with us. And my name is Rostyslav Semkiv. I'm from Kyiv-Mohyla Academy. I'll moderate this discussion, but first let me start with a very short preface. In 1996, here in Lviv, appeared a very important book, and that was the Anthology of Worlds, Literary Critical Thought of the 20th Century. Антологія літературно-критичної думки ХХ сторіччя. This book, this anthology was composed by Ukrainian professors Maria Zubricka, Larisa Onishkevich, and Ivan Fizer. And that was the initial breakthrough in scholar methodologies in Ukraine. As far from that very book, we all learned such names as Jacques Derrida, Yulia Kristeva, Michel Foucault, and Roland Barthes, and so on and so forth. So that was for the first time, and this book initially started the diversity of different approaches to literature and to culture in general. And the section of post-colonial criticism was represented there by names of Edward Said, Homi Bhabham, and Gayatri Chakravorty Spivak. And for quite a long period, almost for 10 years, those extracts and this essay, Can the Subaltern Speak, formed the frame of understanding of post-colonial studies and the related problems. And in 10 years, in 2006, appeared a great volume of your essays here in the other worlds, В інших світах, composed by Professor Svetlana Slipchenko. And in the same year, in 2006, the most known book by Professor Ewa Thompson also appeared in Ukrainian. In English, it was Imperial Knowledge, Russian Literature and Colonialism, and in Ukrainian, it was Трубадури імперії, Російська література та колоніалізм. And this very year, we have another edition, new edition of Professor Thompson's book. So it's a very good chance to speak with the very important persons in this field, in the field of post-colonialism. For me personally, it's something very fantastic.
Thank you, for me too.
Yeah. We all appreciate that you come here, perhaps. I have two general questions that I would like to address both professors, if Ewa Thompson connects, and then personal questions, and then there will be the possibility to ask questions from the audience. And we can start with this, we can just think about the scale of this problem. So we have the full-scale war. We have we face the special propaganda hints from Russian side, yes, that Ukrainians don't exist, and Ukraine is a territory inhabited by Russians, in fact, but they are controlled by Nazist regime, Kyiv junta, and so they have to liberate all these Russians here. This rhetoric, in fact, mirrors all things that Hitler's propaganda said about the situation of Austrians, of Czechs. They were not really a nations yet, but Germans, and their army should liberate them all. And as we are accused now that we threaten somehow the security of Russian Federation, the same was said to the Polish people, yes, by Hitler, that Poles somehow threaten Germans in their existence. So the question is, what we see now is, in fact, the rebirth of colonialism in its worst version, aggressive, expansionist, and with big plans for future. So the question is whether it is an anomaly. So the whole in civilized world, this aggression of Russians, or it is a tendency, and it can be followed by others. And additionally, whether the sentiment for imperial past exists in the metropolis, in former metropolis of the world.
This is an extremely important question, of course, and I think, like most important questions, the correct intellectual answer that I can approach is yes and no. It is not an anomaly insofar as globalization is a species of imperialism. As our brother Marx would say, no extra economic coercion. There is, of course, extra economic coercion. And what happens there? We feel that very much. The difference between state budgets and the global budget is taken away so that the same system of exchange is established, and the state, rather than be a constitutional instrument of redistribution, which it hardly ever is, but nonetheless it's supposed to be, I mean, ask Habermas, but at any rate the state, instead of being that, becomes managerial for global economy. That is our new imperialism. Why? Because territorial imperialisms are inconvenient. And that's why Russia and Israel are anomalies. Because those are territorial imperialisms where you need genocide in order to pretend that the space is just yours. So therefore, you have to look at it in these two ways. And on the other hand, Putin's personal power hunger, what it is doing is changing a more acceptable kind of imperialism, which is indirect rule with autonomy. You know, if you don't mind my saying so, from our end of the world, even NATO looks like that. And the European Union, for sure, because it's debtor states and creditor states. You know what I'm saying? So to an extent, the actual definition of empires, you know, I was quoting Tilly yesterday, exercise of power through intermediaries who enjoy considerable autonomy within their own domains in return for the delivery of compliance, tribute, and military collaboration with the center. This is tolerable. And in fact, the neoliberal global situation is like that, with false promises of level playing fields. But what Putin and Netanyahu are doing are anomalies, because territorial imperialisms are stupid. This relates to individual power hunger. That's what I would say.
So that's the imperialism of the old type. And,
the old kind,
yeah, mm-hmm.
Anomaly.
And that's, yeah. Mm-hmm. And so the capitals of the former empires, they try to switch to this new type of imperialism, which is globalism.
In fact, no, because that whole difference was geographical. There is north in the south. I mean, at home in India, for example, there are what we call dipsos, dollar income private sector. You see, so therefore, this was defined by Robert Reich very nicely. You can't really go that way anymore, imperial countries and center and periphery, because there's center in the periphery and periphery in the center.
So it is more dangerous then. And this anomaly, the territorial colonialism, in fact, has no future this way. Okay. Let it be so. And the second question I planned to ask to both speakers is about metaphors. And we, as humanitarians, yes, we deal with different metaphors, and some of them are very alive and very active. And since the beginning of the independence, since the independence in 1991, there was a story, very popular metaphorical story, yes, from Bible about Moses that went with his people through the desert for 40 years to wait all those who were born, who remember the colonial existence, the slavery, would die in this desert, and only with the new generation it is possible to forget the legacies of the slavery of the colonial rule. It is directly combined with the topic of our discussion. So how strong are these legacies? And can they be overcome? Because while reading, for example, this very famous book by Bill Ashcroft, The Empire Writes Back, there is the impression that those legacies are so strong that they cannot be overthrown for a very, very long time. So is it a perspective to get rid of these legacies at all?
This too is a question that we worry about, rather than, just answer academically. I will say that from my experience as a member of a colonized country and also an inhabitant of a new empire, the United States, my feeling is that some of it is historical stuff that will not go away. It's not a legacy. It's totally something that we have absorbed. For example, in my part of the world, most of the jurisprudential words are Arabic Farsi because of the Mughals, because they established real jurisprudence in our country. So that is a very strange thing, isn't it? And there's no way that anybody wants to get rid of that, no. But on the other hand, and also there are various, for example, I work in the villages. There, they've never seen white people. And so they don't really know much of anything about colonialism. I mean, they know there's an Independence Day. And I asked one of the little girls, what is it that we celebrate on Independence Day? Because they often ask me to give speeches, right? So she says, well, we got rid of the British. And I said, who are the British? I don't know. So I said, what happened? We got rid of them. Okay. What did they do? They did not let us celebrate Independence Day. That's what she said. So to an extent, in the villages, they know the caste system. So that's thousands of years old. Colonialism is just 400 at most. So to an extent, they are much more aware of the fact that I'm an upper caste person than they are aware that the whites
Can you hear
them.
me?
Because the whites, to an extent, did not screw them.
Parents, so now I'll try video, right?
My parents sent me to a school which was taught by tribals and so-called untouchables, Christianized by the Lutherans, right? Because they wanted us as upper caste Hindus to actually
I can
have
see myself
these
now.
people whom we treated like
me?
animals. We didn't touch them. We didn't give them water. So to an extent, do we want to get rid of that legacy? No. So there is incredible cruelty. There is incredible exploitation.
Okay.
But this so-called civilizing mission,
it says FaceTime, it's on.
Missionaries, they're both bad guys and good guys. It's complicated. So that, when today the NGOs want to do good to the third world, it's a bit like that.
Let me see.
So they should be aware. I talk about complicity. We who are from that part of the world, and I do much more work in Bangladesh because Bengali is their mother tongue and mine, rather than in India,
so now you can hear me and you can
Hindi that well. It's there. The attitude of the European donors and the international civil society is something that we are not always comfortable with.
I can hear them not as well as I can hear you, but I can hear them.
Is especially engendering. It's almost like be like me and you'll be a good gender. So that, to an extent, are the how to get rid of. But I'll tell you something else.
All right, very good.
What you have to do.
That was a lot of trouble, yes, I almost saw.
Because, as I was saying yesterday, every generation is born with the basic human affects of greed, fear, and violence. So to an extent, that's mixed up with the so-called legacy of imperialism. Sorry, I took a long time, but go ahead.
Okay, I see that Professor Ewa Thompson joined us
good.
In our discussion. Hello. Okay, we already started, and I already said all these great words about great books that both professors have written. And Professor Thompson, we were thinking about the legacies of the colonialism and whether it is possible to overcome them in what time perspective. Can you add your expertise to this?
Let me first say. Yes, let me first say that I did not hear the previous discussion, so I may be going off, on tangents because I'm not in line with what you two are talking about. But the legacy of colonialism, of course, is great impoverishment. This is something that happens to all post-colonial countries. And another thing that is very important and frequently forgotten about is what is called prestige or soft power, or things that are very difficult to pinpoint, but which actually have enormous influence. There's an enormous influence on a country's standing internationally. So this soft power is lost. For instance, if you go to a bookstore and you see a book by a Russian writer. I'll call him the Muscovite writer for the purposes of our discussion. And then you see a book by, say, Bulgarian writer. Which book are you going to buy? You probably are going to buy the book by the Russian writer, because you know Russia is a powerful country. Russia has produced great writers. Russia is this and Russia is that. And where is Bulgaria, actually? Does one ever know where Bulgaria is situated on the map? And are there any Bulgarian writers? Are there any Bulgarian deeds in history? You go and buy the Russian book. So this is, in miniature, something that is basically called soft power. Bulgaria lost soft power by being part of the Russian Empire or Muscovite Empire. Russia gained soft power by having all those nations subjugated to it. So this is the situation. Now, how do you get out of this situation? Well, first thing, of course, is to gain sovereignty. This is, again, something that is very much underrated by countries that have been sovereign for centuries, such as Germanic Central Europe, Western Europe, and many other countries in the world. It seems to those to members of these societies that sovereignty is nothing, that what matters really, is economic development and social interaction and so forth. But sovereignty is something very precious, and it is something that has to be gained before any action, really serious action, can be undertaken. So first thing you need to get is your sovereignty back, and then you can plan how to rebuild your prestige, how to rebuild your soft power, and of course how to rebuild your economic and political status in the world.
Okay, thank you. Yes, that is the way. And once again, as also Professor Chakravorty Spivak said, it is quite important, yes, to switch to this, to use soft power also, yes, and it is more the next step of this, of course, after the true sovereignty is gained. But then the question: do we have in the world the powerful enough examples of this avoiding of these legacies? That somewhere where the empire dominated for several, perhaps centuries, but then the sovereignty and then the successive work or defeat of these legacies, and then this reassessment of the metropolitan culture that previously dominated. Do we have examples of this successful getting rid of the empire? I think, yeah.
Yeah, I just will say Professor Spivak knows better about these things. But I would say India is a good example. I mean, good Lord, this is a world power now, and going up and up and up and up. And it was a colony of Great Britain at some point. Another example that I would like to bring in on a scale of, this is the big country. Let me mention a small country such as Ireland. Ireland was under English domination for several centuries, and only at the beginning of the 20th century, 1920s, that Ireland regained its sovereignty. And at this point, Ireland is a full-fledged member of Western society, and nobody thinks of Ireland as a former colony. So here you are, they rebuild their prestige, they rebuild their society, and are doing very well. Yes, of course it's possible. And Ukraine, of course, is on the road towards this goal.
Okay, Ireland as an example. And what do you say to this?
Well, I think, Eva, if I may call you by your first name, and you certainly may call me by mine. She knows that I'm a little less sanguine about getting rid of empire, because I don't think sovereignty, in fact, is achieved if one doesn't have a monolithic you. You achieve sovereignty. Who achieves sovereignty? You go into these, I work in India, I work in Latin America, I work in Senegal, I work in Nigeria, I work in Kenya. You get into these places and you see incredible streams of power being played within the countries post-colonially. As I was saying yesterday, that if one looks at Fanon, one sees that, and if one looks at Du Bois, that the way in which so-called post-colonial nations are described are Max Weber's description of patrilineal places where the structure of democracy is used to actually develop, and this is certainly true in India, to actually develop the patronage society. Structure of democracy is used. So to an extent, I feel, we have much in common, but in this particular area, I'm not so sanguine. Sovereignty, Ukraine is different. Ukraine is a very special kind of, we look up to Ukraine because of the way in which the history of Ukraine has developed. So I'm not, in fact, speaking about Ukraine at all. As I was saying yesterday, that you can be a corrective. But certainly, if you look at places like India, which is now, as I said, a genocidal theocracy, it is sovereign for sure. All the IT people are Indians. But at the same time, it's something that you have to question.
Thank you. Yep.
Can I say something? Okay. Yeah, actually, of course, you know much more about India than I do, and I sort of accept your opinion here. But I was thinking mostly of non-Germanic Central Europe and non-Muscovite Eastern Europe, where sovereignty was and is still the first step to regaining some kind of status in the world. And you're right, patronage is a great danger, and it happens in all those countries. And I'm sure in India it must be colossal as well. This is one of the dangers. I'm not saying that getting sovereignty will solve the problems, not at all. But it is something that really has to be there. Otherwise, the interest, economic interest and political interest of a nation are completely compromised, because the nation is ruled by people that don't wish the nation well. So this is like the first step. It's like the preface to success. I would still insist that this is something you have to have. Otherwise, what is the alternative? You're ruled by somebody abroad that basically doesn't have your interest in mind. So, preface, can we agree on that?
I'm with you. I'm totally with you. And I see your point of view, and I do agree. The only thing that I'm saying, and I know that you know what I'm talking about, even when so-called sovereignty is achieved, it doesn't mean that the people at the top really wish well for the entire nation state. I don't work only in India, I also work in Africa. And this, unfortunately, is something that Africans themselves do agree with. I'm thinking of people like Aloysius Tenkabe in Ghana and Mamadou Diouf in Senegal, that we don't, I absolutely agree with you about sovereignty, no problem there. But I cannot say that once sovereignty is achieved, the people who get to the top necessarily wish well for the entire nation state. We have to agree to disagree there, if you like.
I agree with you. I agree with you completely, because you have a situation in Poland now where the people that are at the top simply don't wish well to the nation, because all the great projects that were initiated by the previous government have suddenly been dropped. And Poland is now again a country that sends its workers to Germany to collect asparagus. There's a joke in Poland about it, in fact, many jokes. And the leaders of the country want that to happen. So, of course, I know that sovereignty doesn't solve the problem. But again, as a preface, it's necessary, and I lament what you describe in Africa and other countries, and I say that the same is sometimes going on in non-Germanic Central Europe and in non-Muscovite Eastern Europe. Yes, patronage and basically the desire to enrich oneself at the expense of society are there very much present.
Wonderful example. I'm with you. I'm very happy for Poland. Carry on.
Yes, that's quite a different situation, as we say about the colonialism in Europe among nations or
about
in Africa.
Central Asia, I have a different point of view, but we should get on to other questions.
Yeah. But I have one question. It is connected with this one previous about the cancel culture. We now have the situation that this cancelment goes from beneath, from the grass level, just because of this aggression. All Russian writers, they don't have now readers, so they don't. They are not read already, and we have different approach to this to Russian literature. That's literature that is not. That is not present now, perhaps anymore. But I have just a side question about this cancelment, about the attitude to Russian literature in Poland just now, and how it changed, maybe, and to English literature in India. I can even give one more specific question, because there were speculations about the possible museum of Rudyard Kipling in Mumbai, because he was born in Mumbai. And why not in Mumbai have the museum of Rudyard Kipling? Is it possible, the museum of Rudyard Kipling in Mumbai now? And what is the attitude to Russian culture, to Russian literature in Poland? Yes.
Well, who's going to speak first? Poland is not as exposed to Russian colonialism at this point as Ukraine is. So any kind of dissatisfaction with seeing the world presented by Russian writers is weaker in Poland than it is in Ukraine at this point. I would rather think about something else, namely that in Poland, people are beginning to be aware of history, which was completely shadowed by Russian colonialism. Namely, I wonder whether you will find that true, what I will just say, namely that the fact that Ukraine belonged to the Polish-Lithuanian Ruthenian Commonwealth for as long as 4 centuries and belonged to Muscovy for 2 centuries, whether this fact is even mentioned in history books. Think about it. I mean, when the Lithuanian Prince Jagiello, who conquered Ukraine, wrenched Ukraine out of, the embrace of the Mongols, when this Prince Jagiello married the Polish princess, a big state was created in Europe called Polish-Lithuanian and Ruthenian Commonwealth. This state lasted from 1384 until the last partition of Poland. Again, this is a misnomer because it was not just Poland, many other countries, many other nations, I should say. And you have the situation where Ukrainians were part of the Western world through this unity of this big state. And only towards the end of the 18th century did total Ukraine came into Muscovite hands, except, of course, for the little part that went into Austria. Now, I wonder whether Ukrainians use that argument when Muscovites say, well, Ukraine was united to Moscow for all those centuries. Теперь мы видим воссоединение. Воссоединение. There couldn't be any воссоединение since there was never any соединение. This is something that I think should be raised whenever we read Russian literature or literature of local writers, because it sort of destroys the big lie which Moscow has perpetuated, namely that Ukraine is really part of Russia, because it has always been Russian. It hasn't. It was wrenched out of the grasp of the Mongols by Lithuanians, and then became part of this big country. So this is something that I'm anxious to promote and anxious for people to understand, that you don't need to, you don't need other arguments for Ukraine's belonging to Europe. Just mention Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth.
You and
as far as we are, that's wonderful, really. I've been reading a little bit of Ukrainian history, and I think people need to think this way, because for me, now, of course, my point of view is very dependent on the way I was educated. My BA is from the University of Calcutta. I was educated in India in English honors. So to me, this, and I was born before independence, to me this is not really rejection, it's censorship. And I think as teachers, we have an obligation. We were taught to say yes to the enemy, which is extremely important if you are going to become democratic, because democracy is not just for your friends. So to an extent, that training, and I went to an extremely fantastic political school, Presidency College, so most of our presidents came out of that college. The idea of thinking of this in this kind of very strange way, non-partisan, that's how we were brought up. And I will tell you, I mean, in college, and I will tell you that this business of not reading English literature, it's much more prevalent in the United States. I teach English, French, and German literature complete at Columbia. They don't know a damn thing. You know, you cite absentee from Felicity a while. Is there a better English line? Hamlet. They haven't heard of anything like that. You know, you say some wonderful sentence from the Ode to a Nightingale. They don't know it, and yet they're in the English departments. So therefore, this is ridiculous. And as for English, Indians write a lot of literature in English. So to an extent, if you go to the Commonwealth Association, as I go all the time, there is a great deal of contempt for the Indian writers who write in English and get very large royalties, except those of us who also write in Bengali and Hindi and Marathi and Gujarati. We are not getting that kind of. So this is an Indian phenomenon. It's got nothing to do with Kipling and Bombay. So, you know, this particular situation is a complicated situation. I run a translation series where I translate theoretical material written in the African languages, because nobody pays any attention to them. Theory is only from the European languages. So, you know, you approach this in a slightly different way, if you like.
Yes, but Indian situation in India, it is just really post-colonial, as far as, first of all, Great Britain doesn't have any territorial pretensions and is not aggressive already to the colony, the former colony. And someone, perhaps Timothy Snyder, said that post-colonialism, that's the work for two. For the colony to elaborate this past, and also for the metropoly that should also make this reassessment and revaluation all the approaches. And until this equity is not done, then it doesn't exist. So this way, yes, it's just this different situation in comparison to words we have, so the concealment is just now the ongoing process, and it is not possible to stop it. I compare also, always with the situation in Soviet Union after the World War II, where the first German author appeared only in 1965. Before that, there were no German authors there. But if I can then return to these questions we had, so is it then possible? I have two questions separate for each professors, and so if we speak about the repressed cultures and languages, so there is perhaps no way for them to compete with this classical European literature. So this inequity, it would be present once and for all. Yes. What do you think about the perspectives of Catalan literature, Irish literature, Bengali?
Actually, you asked this question in connection with my essay, Can the Subaltern Speak? Yes? Well, I would say that, as I told you yesterday, the goal is not a competitive goal of making Catalan, Irish, or Bengali achieving the status of German. I there go very much more in the direction of my very dear friend, Ngugi wa Thiong'o, the Kenyan writer, who in fact abolished the Department of English from the University of Nairobi. And so, but his point of view is that you use the imperial languages for global purposes, political purposes, and so on. I mean, it's bad faith not to agree. I mean, we are all three speaking in English because of imperialism. When I teach in my subaltern schools in India, they don't have any connection with this hostility towards English, etc. If they don't know English, they can't enter the mainstream. So I tell them, how to love English, and I tell them, do you know why they won? I say, our alphabet, Bengali alphabet, it's a beautiful alphabet, it's the Panini Sanskrit alphabet that the structuralists fell in love with, but we don't use it anymore. I mean, we memorize it, but we don't have that many shahs and that many ha's and so on and so forth. We haven't done anything with it. And then I say, you know why English won? Look, only 26 letters, and only 5 vowels. And look, they're even producing sounds which don't exist for us, etc. So they can love the language without having to feel it's bad, they controlled us, etc. Languages don't have politics. So to an extent, you have to have a sense of how to deal with languages. This is how that guy who did, what's the name, the horrible guy who wrote Conflict of Civilizations? Come on, you know. Huntington, yes, thank you. So that's what happens when you're 82. But at any rate, he quite correctly said, and I know it, I live in Little Dominican Republic in New York City, Washington Heights. So he said, look, the lower classes, the working classes, they don't want bilingual education in Spanish and English, and that's quite correct, because without English, they won't be able to enter the mainstream with credit cards. But the wonderful progressive bourgeoisie, they want everything, textbooks in algebra in Bengali. It's nonsense. So to an extent, you have to have a sense of where not to oblige people to have these fake political convictions, which actually remain a kind of culturalism for the elite. The one thing that I will say is Bengali is a little bit different because there is Bengali medium schooling. I went to a Bengali medium school. I learned English as a foreign language. So to an extent, all the 23 languages in India, we have actually schooling in those languages, including on the postgraduate level. So you have to think about it a little bit differently. Okay, so, I mean, somebody was asking me, everybody in India speaks English. No, 2.7% Indians speak English. But because you only meet the people who speak English, and India has 1 billion people, you think all Indians speak English. So you have to think about it a little bit differently. Okay, I could go on and on about Africa, but I want to hear from Ewa.
Okay. Well, I hope that with the whole situation we have now, Russian language will lose the possibility to be the global language, and that would be very okay in our situation. And for Professor Ewa Thompson, yeah, I would like to ask another question, because I was really impressed the previous time when I first was reading the Imperial Knowledge. I was impressed by this substitution when in Russian literature we found that they are pretending to be the victims, not the aggressors, but the victims. And how do you see the situation just now? Because we also have perhaps the same situation when Russians they situate themselves they point themselves not as aggressors, but as victims of Putin's regime and something like this. So they also have to have their portion of pity. Does this narrative really exist now till this time?
Well, this will require a very long answer because it's really would need to take into account several things. Let me just make a small remark about this discussion so far and say that as one climbs the stairs, one has to do it step by step. You cannot jump over 10 steps. And I think sometimes we are so impatient. We say, okay, we need to get 10 steps higher, and we cannot really, we cannot. So let's drop the whole climb. So what I'm saying is that all those things that sometimes people feel, we are exaggerating about, namely the native culture, native language, and so forth, they are really steps. And it will take a long time for nations to reach the point where they can comfortably balance English and, say, Bengali or English in some other language. So I think it's a question of time, and we should not feel that we are sort of forced to do it right now in totality. And when it comes to the reason why Russians so often look at themselves as victims, I have a sort of mini theory, and I'm going to try to summarize it for you. You see, the Russian political system, unlike the European political systems, was based on the Mongol system. Don't forget that Muscovy was ruled by the Mongols for over 200 years. 200 years is enough to create a certain way of looking at a state and society. And this particular system had consisted of 3 layers in society. In the first layer, there was only one person, the Tsar, the Khan, the ruler, the dictator. And he had total power over those other layers. The second layer was very small elite, much smaller than, say, in European countries, which based their political system on ancient Rome, ancient Athens, and a mixture of Christianity. So you have a very small group of people that are privileged in the country, but they still depend on the Tsar totally. The Tsar can kill them tomorrow, no problem. The Tsar could take away their property, no problem. Remember that it was only towards the end of the 18th century that Catherine gave Russian nobility the right to own their estates, whatever, wherever. Now the third group, the third layer of society was, of course, the slaves. The slaves, 95% of society. And the slave by nature is sort of humble, poor, and disadvantaged. And again, as Chernyshevsky says, from top to bottom, all slaves. He said it about his own society. So this tradition of being poor and dependent on the state, and the state having total power, is very strong in Russia. And this is something we forget, because in other countries there was no such tradition. And it is one of the reasons why Russians look at themselves as poor souls. The Russia, to a foreign reader, seems to consist of Akakieviches, people of that kind, the poor people of Gogol, the poor people of Chekhov's stories and also plays, the poor people of Dostoevsky, those people that were on the verge of falling into the sea of slaves because of poverty. So this is one reason why Russians look at themselves as perpetually poor, disadvantaged, acted against, not aggressive at all. But what is interesting here is that this mass of people that is so humble and so poor and so gentle can become the Russian army, which is rather the opposite of these features. And how that happens, I don't know, but it happens.
Two small things. One of them is that, I did mention the Pax Mongolica yesterday. Well, I'm very glad you brought that up, because that is something that we need to remember, that Muscovy was ruled by the Mongols. I had only 20 minutes, but I did bring it up. And talked about the many various different kinds of Tatars and so on and so forth. But also, Stalin was the son of a serf. So to an extent, that discussion is, in terms of poor and humble, and what happens, what do you do to the kulaks once, once Kamenev and Lenin and Trotsky, all of whom were, Trotsky was a nobleman. They didn't take the historical thing into account, that, you have to think about it. So Du Bois did. So to an extent, that's something that we really need to think about. Also, and the final thing that I'll mention, I don't think this audience will know about Ranajit Guha, but you would appreciate, Eva, that if you only read his English stuff, you see that he's a subaltern studies person fighting with the British. But if you read his Bengali stuff, and he wrote a lot of Bengali, you will see that he's not at all interested in the subalterns. He's a very, very bourgeois kind of, Bankim and Tagore and so on and so forth. And to an extent, that is also something that we need to think about. They don't have just a single voice. Who would believe this? But this is a fact. But anyway, that's it.
Okay, thank you. And if there are questions, then you can do this now, because we are short of... I see the first one, please.
What happened? Why is she gone?
Professor Thompson disappeared, perhaps?
Oh, there she is.
Oh, yeah.
First of all, I would like to thank you for such a privilege to listen to three people whose works I was studying at the university. And my question is about the final stop of being post-colonial. Because we know a lot of index of being colonial, of being anti-colonial, and about being post-colonial. But when does the country stops being post-colonial and starts being just what? Just the country, or what?
Ewa, you would like to take this first?
Okay, should I speak?
Yeah,
Okay.
please.
Well, of course, there's no magic date that one becomes post-colonial or normal if one were a colony in the past. It simply happens. I think that, again, it's a question of gradual development. Those things don't happen overnight. Those things are not marked by some kind of, mark posts where people, when they reach it, say, hey, we are now not post-colonial, but a normal country. So you just have to act towards this purpose, and it eventually happens. You suddenly notice that you are treated quite differently than your parents or grandparents were treated when they were, say, going abroad, when they were negotiating treaties and so forth. So don't worry about the final, about how to reach this goal. You just go and use your means to work towards that goal. I know that doesn't, it's not really a satisfactory answer, but you should think about the final goal and go on, and you will reach it before you even notice it.
Give you an answer because this is spoken of in India all the time. Post-colonial stuff has become completely historical. It's been more than 75 years. In the United States, in Britain, they're all very interested in post-colonial studies relating to India. But on the Indian subcontinent, most historians find that to be a historical study that belonged to a certain time. We really don't do much post-colonial stuff in Indian historical studies. I'm glad you asked that question. We have enough problems with the state. So, I'm an Indian citizen. I have, as I was saying, I have a 63-year-old green card in the United States, a permanent residence card. I'm only an Indian citizen, one passport, Indian. And I will say that the problems within the Republic of India, which I believe the task of the intellectual is to provide constructive criticism of the nation state of which she's a part, rather than just go on being a nationalist. So therefore, the task of the Indian today is to the intellectual Indian, as well as the subaltern Indian, is to concern themselves with the fact that the country is going to hell, rather than still worry about, what did the English do to us? So, and in fact, most of the Dalits would rather have the English than what we have in India today. So it's a complicated thing. In India, post-colonial studies is not contemporary.
Okay, thank you. And then question, please. Huh? No.
Okay,
the man word.
First of all, it's an honor to listen to all these insights, and thank you very much for being here. I have a question. I'm from Georgia, actually, so I kind of wanted to link the situation that is currently, I'm not sure if you're aware, that is currently happening in Georgia. And also, we as a nation, much likely the Ukrainians, have been experiencing the epistemic violence, also like physical violence, from the Russian imperialism. And for a significant period of time, we thought that we somehow escaped that. But now, when we have the feeling that it is somehow coming back, the people who have experienced that on their own selves are the ones who are not protesting against it. So I sometimes notice this disconnect among the public. So the ones who should be at the forefront of the protests do not realize that something that they've experienced themselves is coming back. So I was wondering whether you could somehow help us making sense of that conundrum. So how can we escape those colonial traditions, or somehow maybe we can show these people whether there is an alternative at all in this kind of a context. So what can we kind of see in this? Is there a way somehow? Thank you.
Well, the Russian Empire is a very unusual phenomenon. I study empires a little, and I don't know if, Ewa, you would agree with Hobsbawm's description, which is a little old, that the USSR, which of course now is gone, but he's talking about it and in imperial terms, which both belongs and does not belong to the traditional empires of the region of European international politics and the traditional and sometimes very ancient empires of Asia, the pre-communist Chinese empire and so on. It seems to me that one can't really generalize from the way the Russian imperial tradition has returned, and the so-called Socialist Republic was itself also a certain sort of imperial formation, because we were talking about imperial formations having a certain degree of benevolence, cradle to grave employment, etc., etc. But so therefore, I think I can't generalize about imperialism in terms of what's happening in Georgia now. I do, of course, BBC News shows us step by step what's happening in Georgia. I don't know if it gives detail as much as it should. But you know that the ruling class in Georgia, they regularly came to Columbia for instruction, to the School of International and Public Affairs, so that we had a lot of conversational exchange with these people about the future of Georgia. And so I don't think I could, in terms of the Russian imperial formation and the hopes of the ruling class, I could actually generalize a solution. But I wanted to get this said. I think both ways in Georgia are complicated right now. I look at the news and I say to myself, which way should this country go? And so I'll ask Ewa to give, perhaps, since she is more academically educated in all of this, to give us an answer. Let me hear your opinion, Ewa.
Well, what happens is when it comes to Georgia, I know very little except about this recent change of the government, which appears to be pro-Russian now rather than pro-Georgian. Well, this is one legacy that post-colonial countries have, and that is there are a lot of people who can be called Homo Sovieticus in those countries. There's a large percentage of society that would rather choose the Russian domination, because that means, as Gayatri mentioned, the order in society, the full employment, and so forth. So now we are getting into the territory of what we think about human beings as what is a human being and what is important for a human being. I happen to believe that every human being has her own innate dignity. And this dignity requires that that person be free insofar as one can be free, being limited by our physical and societal limitations. So I believe that people who are striving to build up this sense of freedom and identity in Georgia are in the right. People who just want a society where you have hot water in the tap and no unemployment are in the wrong. So that tells you about what I think about the present government in Georgia and how to proceed in the future. Well, I think you first have to ask yourself, what do you think a human being is and what should be striven for? And then you'll find the answer.
I would just say one small thing. I don't know Georgia, but the women who are the parents, the mothers of my students, I showed some pictures yesterday. They don't even know the name India. They're Indians. They vote. They don't even know the name West Bengal, their state. I work in Nigeria. The women who plant the rice these days in the savannas, now that there is a movement, and who speak the unsystematized mother tongues that the missionaries didn't touch, they don't know the name Nigeria. I didn't read this in books. I'm talking of personal experience. So that to an extent, the notion of freedom is it's not, I mean, if we generalize from ourselves, then we can say that that's what a human being wants. But it was very, you know, I've had these schools now and this kind of work for 40 years. Believe me, when I began, I couldn't imagine that I would learn these lessons, that I don't represent the human beings of the world. So to an extent, I don't know if this applies to what you're thinking about, but it's a complicated thing, this business of being human. But at any rate, carry on.
Yeah.
We have 5 minutes.
But we have 2 questions here, just 2 last questions. Yes, please.
Thank you very much for your wonderful presentation. My name is Maria Avdeeva, and I'm researcher of Russian disinformation and covering Russian invasion of the last 2 years. I focus on giving information about what is happening in Ukraine to international audience. And very often me and other journalists are referring to Russian imperial ambitions, trying to show why this is harmful and threatening not only for Ukraine but to other nations. But taking into account this, what you have been talking about, do you think this has grounds? Do audiences in the United States, in Great Britain, do they understand why Russian imperial ambition is like threatening, or they just, for them, something that is connected to an empire is not something that is bad, or they think this is probably something what other countries have the right to do? Thank you.
I don't know about Britain. But certainly in the United States, they do for the wrong reason, because they see this as a US over against Russia. I mean, that is a completely different confrontation and conflict that's existed for a long time, right? So they do understand it, but not necessarily for the right reason. And Trump, of course, loves Putin. So that's I mean, if he becomes president, the United States will not be represented by the president. And we are wondering if that will come to pass. So there is that. But I will say, you know, I was going to talk about Aurelia Borges' collection of letters. Today I said the Women in War. And one of the things that you see in that book, you know, it's Ukrainian women writing letters, right? That there is a certain resentment at being victimized. As, you know, whatever they think about the imperial conflict, the fact of victimizing Ukraine, there is some resentment of that among the women. And I kind of sympathize with that one. I must say that being here for the last 2 days, I don't see you as victims. It's impossible. So to an extent, that is what I have learned through my visit here. I'm very glad I came, because it gave me that sense. Obviously, I'm not in the eastern part, it is true, but nonetheless, one gets a sense, yes? So that would be I can't speak for the United Kingdom, but certainly in the United States, there is a sense of the imperial oppression, domination, exploitation, cruelty, and, you know, you see it happening. But the reason might be also this much older conflict that exists between the United States and Russia, the Soviet Union, and so on. So,
well, can I say something? The fact is, I've taught at American universities for 35 years, and I do keep up with my former students. And I hear the interviews that Tucker Carlson organizes, interviews with Putin, or people like Dugin. And I can tell you with great regret that there's a large percentage of American society that does not understand what Ukraine is fighting for, and doesn't even think about things that it considers natural to be given to the people like Americans, namely freedom, namely liberty. They feel that Russia, of course, is part of, Russia has the right to Ukraine, and that's how it should end, the entire war, an entire conflict. So it's been very difficult and frustrating for me to teach that history that I sort of mentioned to you, namely that Ukraine was not part of Muscovy for 600 years, as the Russian historians tend to say, blurring the times and blurring the lines on the map. It is a nation that has arisen out of various elements, and it was not under Moscow's boot for all those years. And I think that this United States is to some extent like India. I mean, it has so many groups, so many views that it is very hard to say what Americans think. But I have to say that there is a lot of work that needs to be done just by professors or other people to explain to American society what Ukraine is actually fighting for. And this is something that I think we should appreciate and we should work towards.
You, and the last question was?
Thank you very much. I was really struck by this point that decolonizing or working with the colonial history takes two, so both colonizer and former colony. And what I wanted to ask is what is to be done when one part is missing? There are, of course, historical precedents where other empires like the British or sort of the former colonizers like Britain or France were much less willing to talk about this, and it required a push to get them there. So what could be done in the current context? And related to this, I agree that it's problematic to generalize about empires, but there is still something to be gained from conversations like this, where different geographical and historical contexts are brought together. And what do you think could be gained, and how could these different contexts use these conversations? What could be gained from these conversations, and what are maybe the limits of this? Thank you very much.
I'll tell you one thing. I'm very glad you brought this up, because as you spoke, I realized I had ignored something completely. See, the problem with migrants. 1 year, you see, I used to be on the ethics committee of the World Economic Forum. It was really an absurdity, but I was a member. I was the only practicing moral philosopher on that committee. But what happened was 1 year, when it was very fashionable to be for migrants, they had the Davos meeting, and everybody was saying, oh yes, we must be nice to migrants, da-da-da. Except the head of the ILO, the International Labour Organization, the most left of the UN organizations, he said, before you think about being nice to migrants, think about the fact of what's happening in the countries of origin from which they come and what your economic policies are towards those countries. Now, all of the people who were saying these, be nice to migrants, they were looped over and over again. But the ILO guy was not looped, he was stopped. So to an extent, in the post-colonial context, this, what he said, 5-6 years ago, it remains extremely important. We do not think about the way in which the so-called old colonies, to which the migrants are coming and being really treated like animals, as to what, I mean, think of what's happening in the United States. That guy just got off. So we don't think about why these places, in fact, are so devastated. It's not that they're all good. I was making that point also, that we must, yesterday also I spoke about it, that we must think about our pre-colonial problems, pre-colonial auto-critique. And so, therefore, the idea that we have to think about it in at least 2 or 3 different ways. As for the idea of decolonizing, that is absurd. Because in order to decolonize now, what you would really have to think about is regulatable and non-regulatable capital formations. And that nobody does. They just think, oh yes, do your native language and you decolonize. It's not serious. But that's a different issue. So that's what I would say in terms of, I'd forgotten to mention this particular problem, that you can't generalize from migrants.
Yeah, well, I couldn't agree more. The fact is that in our treatment of, say, immigration from Africa and Asia, we completely forget about what forces those people to emigrate. And I'm thinking of one particular example where in order to produce a certain kind of car, I guess the electric car, you need a certain rare earth mineral, which is gotten only by little children working in an African mine. And pictures of those children actually doing that have appeared in the American press, and we all saw them, and we all said, oh, well, isn't it a pity, isn't it a sad thing? And we did nothing about it. So problem is that the fruits of colonialism are still there, and the empire is speaking back, as you, Gayatri, said so wonderfully. And how to solve that problem, it's an enormous problem. I don't think we can really broach it in this discussion.
That's it, and thank you all for the discussion, and please thank our speakers.
I must say that it's been a great pleasure getting to meet you, Ewa, I must say. I'm so happy that we actually had a dialogue. Thank you for joining.
Thank you very much.